I want to talk about confidence and self-esteem. I work a lot with singles that are wanting to be in a relationship. And so this comes up a lot. And, why we get into patterns of relationship or, our experience in the dating process, it's multi-layered, multi-textured. But confidence and self-esteem plays a big part of it because who we believe ourselves to be and ultimately how comfortable we feel within our own skin determines how confident we are in whatever. It might be dating, it could be in your work life, it could just be in general. So what I want to bring to the table is that I see confidence as how comfortable are you within yourself. The more comfortable you are within yourself, the more comfortable you're going to be in any situation, really. But we have to shift this idea that confidence is something that's external. It's like the stilts that hold the Hollywood set up. It's not something that you need to do outside of yourself, and therefore then you will be confident. It's really about asking ourselves, how do we be comfortable within ourselves? And for better or worse, unfortunately, for some of you listening, to be comfortable within ourselves, we've got to be okay with being uncomfortable. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And, we'll see what else comes up along with it. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So I'm not saying that there's certain things that we can't do. For some, affirmations work really well, or some external things like, eating well, or doing exercise, or doing things that kind of inspire you. Of course, all of these things play into our self-confidence. And I was learning a little bit about human design this past week and understanding that, it could be a part of your design that if your ego center isn't defined, you're going to have greater insecurity. That's part of your design. I don't know enough about it to speak any more about it, but I just found it very fascinating that, some people have come in with a greater challenge around trying to understand who they are, or, their insecurity. I've certainly had my insecurities, but I have a defined center. So I have always had a very strong sense of self. So it's so interesting to look at. Sometimes these are great tools to understand the kind of blueprint of who we are, and then how to work with that. It doesn't have to define us. It doesn't pigeonhole us, but how to work with that can be very interesting. And if that doesn't float your boat, that's okay. I'm not going to talk about that today. But really, confidence, what I've discovered, at least for myself, and, doing this work with individuals for a decade and a half almost, is the simplest way for me to describe it is just how comfortable are you within yourself. And it might sound funny because some people will think, well, yeah, shouldn't we be comfortable within ourselves? Like, if you can't be comfortable with yourself, like, who can you be comfortable with? But actually, sometimes being with ourselves can be deeply uncomfortable, especially if we don't have a learnt language of our emotions, our needs, our fears, our insecurities, everything that I've talked about in the past. If we don't have, this is why self-awareness and self-understanding is so important. It is such a vital part of this process because it just gives you, if you have self-awareness, which means that you can observe, witness, look into all various parts of yourself. And the key here is without judgment. This is not about self-criticism. That is so different than self-awareness. That without judgment, without criticism, but to really be able to reflect, self-reflect. Some people can't. They really struggle to flex that muscle. And sometimes it is a bit of a muscle that we have to kind of get used to using in order to understand this process of self-reflection. And then beyond self-reflection, it's really understanding, as I've spoken to a lot, what is the language of my emotions? What are my wounds? What are my patterns? And I was listening to someone talk about this today, another coach, that, we can have an idea of what our pattern is, but if we don't truly understand what our patterns are, we can't change them. We have to really understand, like, get to know thyself. That term. Get to know thyself is really the path to liberation, because when you understand why you function the way that you function, and when you understand who the essence of who you really are underneath these patterns, underneath these behaviors, underneath the wounding and the trauma and life, because life happens, right? It's really hard to change anything. And I want to do a separate episode on what makes a good relationship, but this also pertains to our relationship to ourselves. If we're not willing to look and try to understand and support ourselves and our growth, nothing will change. It won't really. We can live a life where we're coping. We're a little bit at the mercy of our reactivity. We're at the mercy of our emotions. We're not really in quote unquote control, because we're acting out more of our unconscious patterns rather than being able to consciously be with our experience and ourselves and our process. It's just, we'll get through life, but it's very, very different when you can actually feel fully engaged in your life in a conscious, aware, and there's no superiority in this, right? All of this is, as I think I said last week, how can I support you to feel liberated and at peace within yourself? And sometimes when we first start this, step upon this path of self-awareness, it can be a little bit like, ooh, it's a big spotlight and you got to look at a lot of stuff. And that's why I said in the intro, you got to get used to being uncomfortable. And that's what's going to lead you to a place where you'll begin to feel comfortable within yourself. Because think about it this way. If you feel like you have low self-confidence and low self-esteem, it probably means that most of the time you feel pretty damn uncomfortable within yourself. Insecurity is deeply uncomfortable. But what's uncomfortable about that is like you're wiggling in your own skin. You don't feel comfortable just sitting there or standing there and looking at that person with your eyes, into their eyes, or just being able to, I was rewatching an episode of Miranda. I don't know if any of you know that show. It was a BBC show from a long time ago. And she kept on saying, she when she gets really awkward and embarrassed talking to this guy that she likes, she starts making up all this random shit. She starts lying and telling all these stories. And then she keeps on saying, you know what happens when you're nervous and you just start, making up a story and random stuff about yourself. And the other person would be like, no. And she's like, yeah, we all do it. And so, maybe not everyone does it, but some, when we're uncomfortable, when we feel nervous, when we feel insecure, when, whatever that the situation might be, it might be on a date, it might be on a job interview, it might be with a social group of friends, it might be anything. If you are not comfortable in your own skin, it's going to have an element of discomfort, which is a little bit of a different kind of discomfort of what I'm going to get to. But that it's not a nice feeling, right? And so the path of, to be in a state of peace and the path of liberation is that we have to confront these things lovingly, kindly, patiently, compassionately. But we've got to confront it, because otherwise we're forever going to go into these, into life, basically, feeling those feelings of discomfort. And again, we're very good at coping, but do you really want to cope? Or do you want to feel free? If you want to feel free, you got to be willing to look at the things that you're like, oh, I don't like that about myself, right? Or that makes me really deeply uncomfortable. So the only way out is through. So discomfort isn't just about, I feel uncomfortable in this situation. But it's actually going into the deeper discomfort, which is our pain or our sadness or our fear. Fear tends to actually be more on the surface. Actually, we think fear is at the core, but fear is more kind of what drives our behavior. But the fear came out of pain and out of sadness and out of just, whatever, feeling hurt, feeling, there's the wound again, right? You don't need to go back and analyze your whole childhood. It's good to understand maybe why some of the patterns are there and where they originate from and what was the unmet need, and then how you can fulfill that need for yourself. A lot of this is also, and I know I'm repeating myself from past episodes, but a lot of this is just understanding how to become an adult and how to self-soothe. And our society is so backwards that it thinks that babies should be able to self-soothe. And so then, when we're adults and most people have no idea how to self-soothe or self-regulate. And so they, whatever, become needy or anxious or avoidant or all of these things to actually avoid intimacy. I talked about intimacy last week and how we might want intimacy, but actually it can be terrifying for people because it requires us to be vulnerable. And what's needed to be vulnerable is comfort within ourselves, that we feel safe within ourselves, that we feel confident. And confident is not about, okay, I feel perfect and beautiful and fit and happy and wealthy and successful, and then I'm confident. Confidence is no matter what's going on in my life. If I'm comfortable within myself, if I'm comfortable with being down today, if I'm comfortable with feeling bloated today, if I'm feeling comfortable with feeling less attractive today or less sexy or more tired or more sad or more grumpy or whatever it is, if I can, comfort is acceptance. I'm comfortable in my own skin because I'm accepting my experience and I'm not judging it. And there's the container of love that's holding it all. Do you see how I'm going to keep on coming back around? My clients know that I will keep on coming back around because really the process is so simple. It's just about revisiting it again and again and again because we're not used to that. We're actually much more used to being in a very negative story about ourselves, about others, about life, about love, about relationship, and all of those stories and those negative, quote unquote, negative patterns. I don't really like to use those terms, but they can be very addicting because they're familiar and we've identified with them. And so part of this process too is to sometimes really just come down to the radical choice of I'm not going to do that anymore to myself because it's not serving me. And again, it's going to be going against the grain sometimes because our brain functions in a way that it likes the known, even if it's not good for us, than it is comfortable going towards the unknown because that's scary. But actually, maybe that sliver of the unknown is going to be what leads you to your peace and your liberation and ultimately your happiness, quote unquote happiness. So coming back to being with the deeper discomfort, we have to, I think, just acknowledge that being human just entails an element of emotionality, sensitivity, vulnerability, pain, suffering, sadness, fear, all of that. Like, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but in a society that hasn't shown us that that's all okay and that's all part of being human. And if we've neglected our humanity for, God, I could say generations upon generations upon generations, there's a lot to unravel here and to redefine. And a lot of what keeps us stuck where we are is because we have very strong, hard definitions that we think are keeping us safe, but they're actually imprisoning us. They're not benefiting us. Again, we don't want to cope. You don't want to be living with an underlying constant current of fear, because something that came up in a talk in a course was that people can even be afraid of a healthy relationship. I've seen this a lot. I've experienced a partner that I could see was sabotaging something that could actually be really good, because again, either they were used to that pattern of kind of drama or anxiety equated love, or that the insecurity, the lack of self-worth, I don't deserve this. Even though I want this, I don't deserve this. And that's all unconscious, right? That's not consciously playing itself out. It's unconscious. But we've got to face that, because the moment we can make it conscious, we can kind of, grab the tiger by the tail and go, okay, no more. You're not going to threaten me anymore, right? You can actually alchemize it by giving yourself the underlying need. So confidence and comfort and being with our discomfort, it just means that whatever it is that we're afraid of, we've got to acknowledge it. Like I'm afraid of intimacy, or I'm afraid of vulnerability, or I'm afraid of being too close to someone. I'm afraid of love. I want it, but if I love, I'm afraid that I will be abandoned or rejected, or that something will go wrong, or at some point I'll be disappointed. Or do you see what I mean? That's the story. That's the story that fear created, that keeps us from the very thing that we're wanting, because it believes that it's keeping us safe. And it's not. It's keeping us small. And so using fear as the example, you've got to sit with the discomfort of, I'm scared. Never mind the story. Like the story you have had on loop for, I'm sure, years, if not decades of your life. Just press pause as much as you can. Like sometimes you just have to say, I'm not going to believe that story anymore. That was me in the kitchen in my 20s when my whole abandonment story was coming up, and I had to stop myself and go, is this actually true right now? And the answer was so clearly no. So I just said, enough. I'm done with this story. It is no longer true in this moment. I'm done with it. Now, how you change a pattern is you make a different choice. You don't keep on repeating this story. You don't keep on having the same emotional reactions to that story. You don't keep on having the same beliefs about yourself that are related to the emotions which are related to this story. You just make a different choice, and you can say, okay, enough. I'm not going to do that anymore. And and this is the interesting thing about discomfort. When we're caught up in the story, it's really uncomfortable. It's really painful. And so some people go, well, I am being with my pain. No, you're being with the pain that's attached to your story. You're not being with the underlying pain, which was the initial wound. That's the pain that you need to get to, not the pain of your story, right? You want to get to the pain of underneath. And again, you don't need to overanalyze it. Sometimes it's just like breathing into the experience. You might feel sadness in your heart. You might not even understand why. And if you need to understand why, then it's great to have a coach or a therapist to guide you through that. But sometimes it's just powerful enough to just be with the feeling. And what you're doing in those moments by staying and being with the discomfort is you're teaching yourself how to be comfortable with the discomfort. And you're showing yourself, I'm here for me. I'm not abandoning, I'm not judging, I'm not rejecting, I'm not ignoring, because a lot of people ignore themselves and their pain. But they get really upset that if other people do that, you know what I mean? And you're showing yourself, I'm here. That's how you build trust. If you build trust with yourself, if you cultivate that sense of comfort when you're feeling uncomfortable about something, you will settle into yourself on such a more profound and in such a more relaxed way that will inevitably lead you to feel more confident in yourself. It's not an outside-in job. It's an inside-out job. And just like self-love, it's not something that we get to by doing, X, Y, and Z on the outside. It's about actually just accepting your experience. And then self-love just it's there. It's not something you need to acquire outside of yourself. Confidence is not something you need to acquire outside of yourself. It all boils down to, what is your state of being? If you're in your mind, which most of us are, I really invite you to find ways to drop into your heart. The mind, like I said last week, can tell you all sorts of stories. The mind is not the truth. The mind is like a translator. And sometimes things really get lost in translation, and sometimes the mind goes into fantasy. And so you can't always believe or trust the stories and the thoughts that, go with those stories and everything else, the identity, most especially about yourself or others or love or whatever. So dropping into your heart, that might be challenging. That might be a pretty big journey, but I really invite you to start that journey. And in a simple way, like just bringing your awareness into your breath, into your body, into your heart, into your gut, into your belly. When an emotion comes up, ask yourself, what are the sensations in my body? Where in my body do I feel that? Is there an emotion that comes with that sensation? This is all helping to bring your consciousness and your awareness down into your experience and get out of the mind, because the mind is so limiting. It's really virtually impossible to actually really heal and resolve anything unless you're going into the deep brain, which is what brain spotting will do. But if you're just in the neocortex, if you're in the thinking mind, it's not going to happen there. It's just not. So being comfortable with yourself, it reminds me of a story. Maybe I've shared this a long time ago. It reminds me of a story, my first long-term relationship in my, when I was 20 or something like that, 19, 20. I was the dancer at the time. And my boyfriend at the time was really like, we'd go out dancing and he'd be really shy. And I think I told this story, but basically, long story short, instead of just having him like not dance, I would go up on the dance floor and be like, let's just be really goofy. Let's just be really goofy and silly and dance really badly. And we'd inevitably end up having so much fun that other people would kind of join in, and then we would get into dancing. But it's just, again, it's getting out of this like self-consciousness, the discomfort of being who we are and sometimes feeling really awkward. And it's kind of just like owning that. It's Hollywood that's like, you've always got to be cool. You've always got to be sexy. You've always got to have the best answer. You've always got to be funny. You've got, it's like, that's a script, people. The reason why it works in a film is because it's literally scripted. Life isn't scripted. And so we've got to be comfortable with improvising. And the way that we get comfortable improvising is we get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we just got to be ourselves, and that's where presence and self-awareness is really helpful, because presence is the part of you that checks in with you. How are you doing right now? How are you feeling? What would you like? Do you need anything? And it's really just about learning how to be you. So much of what doesn't work in relationship and dating is that a lot of people are not really acting as themselves. They're acting as someone that they think they should be so that that person will like them, or that they'll be more cool or more interesting. And so we're not really being necessarily true to ourselves or authentic. And it's kind of a bad foot to start relationship on, right? Because then all of a sudden it's like, oh, your true self is going to be revealed. It's like, oh, they got to see what you look like when you wake up in the morning and you don't have a face full of makeup. Or I see it with men too, that they're terrified, like, oh, at some point she's going to figure out who I truly am, and the gig's going to be up. The gig or the jig. So what would it be like if we could go into dating, into a relationship, into a job interview, I used to be an actress and I used to go into auditions, and I always knew that the auditions that I knew I got the job were the ones that I went in and I just was like, I'm just going to be me. Okay, I'm playing this character, but I'm just going to be comfortable in myself. Notice I said comfortable, not confident. I'm just going to be comfortable in myself and be present with myself. And that it just inevitably leads us into confidence. So don't think about the confidence. If you think about the confidence as what you need to attain and achieve, then it's going to be an outside in. It's going to be a facade. It's going to be a mask. And you can fake it until you make it. But really, you want the outer and the inner to be integrated. You don't want them to be two separate things. You don't want to create such a strong persona that you feel confident in the persona, but if anybody cracks through that you're going to be like, a scared little mouse in the corner on the inside. You want to have your inner world and your outer world integrated so that you can be you in any situation. Now, with that said, of course, there's also the wisdom of healthy boundaries. Being who you are and being comfortable in who you are and being authentic doesn't mean I'm going to be vulnerable in every situation. I'm going to present all parts of myself to everyone. I'm going to be open-hearted and intimate with just anyone in my life. Like, no, boundaries are, and having discernment of who do we share ourselves with? How much of us do we share ourselves with? But it's like within that, it's not about defenses or barriers or lies or masks or facades. It's just understanding yourself so well that this is like getting into the energetics of things. You just know how to take care of yourself given the situation and the person that you're with, right? It reminds me of what Brené Brown says, is that we can share our story with anyone, but not everyone deserves to hear it. And deserves, I don't know if I'd use that word, like yes, in some instances, absolutely, but also not everyone has the capacity to hear it. Not everybody has the capacity to understand. Not everyone has the capacity to empathize, for instance, like if we're sharing something that's deeply vulnerable and sensitive and challenging. Some people, it's not the right situation. They don't have the awareness or the consciousness to be able to hold that. Maybe they're overwhelmed in their own life. You know what I mean? So discernment is a really important part of this process as well. So, okay, how to be more comfortable with ourselves. So in part, you got to sit with the parts of you that you're uncomfortable with, your pain, your sadness, your fear, your insecurity, all of that jazz. But you also just need to give yourself the permission to play. Like play, explore, discover, be goofy, stretch yourself, go beyond your comfort zone. Ironically, that's going to make you more comfortable with yourself if you stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone, because your comfort zone is not actual true comfort. Your comfort zone is just what you're familiar with. It doesn't, you're comfortable being in that little tiny square space. That's not actual being comfortable within yourself, because being comfortable within yourself is no matter what, even if you feel uncomfortable and you still feel comfortable within yourself, there you go. That's confidence. So what I mean by that is you might go up on, have to do some public speaking and it might feel deeply uncomfortable. And you're like, shit, I'm really nervous. God, what are people going to think? What if I mess up? What if I don't, what if I forget this? Whatever. And you still do it because you're like, that's okay. I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then you step into your authenticity, because what you're doing is you're giving yourself the permission, be you. Be you no matter what. No matter what, I'm here. I'm holding you. I'm loving you. I'm not judging you. Was it last weekend? 2 weekends ago? I did an open mic spontaneously. And I did some songs that I knew kind of, we just started with my friend Neil, who does the guitar. And then after, I was just like, fuck it. There was a keyboard there. And I'm like, I'm going to sing a song that, we hadn't rehearsed. So I kind of knew it. I had, played with it a little bit that morning on the piano at home. I play the piano by myself. Okay. It's me, myself, the wall, and I. Like, even if I have like my closest friends or my partner or something like that, that's in the room with me, my hands will start to shake and I'll start to get nervous and I won't sing in the same way and I won't play in the same way. So for me to go, fuck it, I'm going to do this in front of a, crowd of strangers, I was comfortable in myself at that moment. So I was willing to take the risk and I was willing to just be myself. That's what was so enjoyable about that experience, is I really allowed myself to let go. The 3 singing experiences, public singing experience that I'd had before that, I'd always been very nervous, and an element of my voice and my body always felt a bit shaky. Even if people couldn't see it, I felt it. And this open mic, I just gave myself the permission. I allowed myself to just be comfortable within myself and to play and to express myself and just allow my joy to come through. And so I sat down and I was kind of fiddling on the piano a little bit. And then I was just like, okay, do it. Just, you got to start. You got to start. And there was a point in the piece where I messed up the piano. And I had like a little giggle. And then I kept on going. And you know what? I'm still alive. I'm still standing here, sitting here, talking to you. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay. I honestly, I have to say, in this experience, I didn't even feel embarrassed. I just didn't, because I had already set myself up to feel, I was already comfortable within myself. And you know what? If you have that experience and you do feel the embarrassment, like, then sit with that discomfort and be like, man, that was so embarrassing. Woo, that feels hot and uncomfortable in my body. Like, if you can stay with that, and it's gonna, like, it might make you cringe, but if you can stay with that and begin to feel comfortable with the discomfort of that, you are so on the right path. And you'll recognize that your body will like, okay, I don't have to. Remember how I always say, are you in a state of tension or are you in a state of relaxation? So when your body recognizes it doesn't have to be in that state of tension and resistance to the experience, and it can relax, you're going to start to feel more comfortable. If you feel more comfortable, you're going to feel more confident. If you feel more confident, you're probably going to show up a hell of a lot more authentically. And if you show up more authentically, your life is going to change, because you're going to you're going to see and say yes to situations that feel good for you, that feel authentic, that are in resonance and in alignment with who you authentically are. We've got to get out of perfection. Fuck perfection. Okay? Fuck the metaphoric Botox culture that we live in. Filter. Now it's like AI that, that's like, you have to be this perfect representation of who you are. No. Be you. Be the human that you are. Be the incredible spirit that you are behind the human, with the human that you are. Be you, because otherwise, why would you be put on this earth as uniquely you? Each one of us has a different fingerprint. We're not meant to be the same. This homogenization, this globalization of everything. Like, I give the middle finger to it. And I say that like with humor and love and, not anger and spite, but just like playful, giving it the playful middle finger. Because why? Why do we need to measure ourselves up to something that is so boring and monotonous? And I think what's amazing about being humans and being so many of us here is that we are all unique and special. And sure, we have a lot of similarities, but you're still uniquely you. And if you're a single looking for a relationship, why would you not want to be you? You want to show up as yourself because you want to be loved for who you are. And so why we do this work is to unravel any of the parts that believe, well, who we are is wrong, or who we are is not good enough, or who we are is shameful. And, if you're lucky enough to come across a relationship where someone will love you even when they can see your shame and your insecurity, that will support you in healing as well. But ultimately, that's what we need to also see for ourselves and do for ourselves. Sometimes we need to do that first. Sometimes a partner will help us do that. Sometimes a coach will help you do that. Sometimes a reflection is important. But being comfortable with ourselves is being able to go in and look at all aspects of ourselves and still just embracing us and saying, I love you. I'm here. You're all good. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Right? Like, you might be quirky there. You might be silly there. You might, whatever. Love that too. Love that too. Love all parts. See, it always comes back to love. Damn it. No. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.